The salt-laced wind, a familiar tormentor, tore at the threadbare collar of my jacket as I navigated the winding path above the churning sea. My name is Dean, and for years, I had chased the echoes of forgotten civilizations, sifting through dust and dogma, only to find the present perpetually more tedious than any past. Academia, once a vibrant tapestry of inquiry, had become a shroud of administrative tedium, each new discovery buried under layers of bureaucratic jargon and grand proposals. My current task, assessing the preliminary findings of an unprecedented deep-sea excavation, felt less like scholarship and more like glorified inventory. "It's unprecedented, Dean," the project lead had said, his voice thin with a forced enthusiasm that grated on my nerves. "A structure unlike anything we've ever catalogued and something inside." She hadn't elaborated, merely provided coordinates and a secure access code, a veiled urgency in her tone that suggested more than just a fresh archaeological wonder. My cynicism, a well-worn shield, had already formed its defense, another misidentified geological anomaly, another overhyped media sensation. Yet, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor had snaked through my resolve, a whisper of something truly other that even my jaded intellect couldn't entirely dismiss. The path eventually veered sharply, descending into a network of ancient coastal caves. Here, the ocean's roar amplified, echoing off the damp, calcified walls. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of brine and primordial dampness, a stark contrast to the sterile, climate-controlled archives I usually inhabited. Fluorescent lights, strung haphazardly from temporary supports, cast an anemic glow, struggling against the pervasive gloom that clung to the cave's deepest recesses. I passed several uniformed guards, their faces grim under the harsh light, their presence a stark indicator of the gravity of the find. This wasn't just a dig site, it was a containment zone. The corridor narrowed, twisting deeper into the earth until it opened into a cavernous chamber. Here, the air was colder, stiller. A small team of engineers and other researchers, their faces etched with a mixture of fatigue and an almost reverent apprehension, huddled around a central, shrouded mass. The project lead, a woman whose usually brisk demeanor was now softened by an uncharacteristic stillness, met my gaze. She offered a tight, almost imperceptible nod, then gestured towards the object. "It was found within the primary structure," she stated, her voice hushed, as if afraid to disturb the very air around the find. "At nearly 3,000 meters. We managed to extract it intact." One of the engineers, a broad-shouldered man with a perpetually furrowed brow, moved to the side of the shrouded form. With a single, deliberate motion, he pulled back the heavy canvas. My breath hitched. Not in awe, not in wonder, but in a sudden, sickening confusion that assaulted my senses like a physical blow. It was not a statue, nor a tool, nor any discernible fragment of architecture I had ever seen. Surfaces met at impossible junctures, folding inward upon themselves, only to emerge at an unexpected angle, creating a visual paradox that made my eyes ache. It seemed to absorb the meager light of the cave, drawing it into its depths rather than reflecting it, leaving only a faint, shimmering outline where its edges should have been. "We can't get a definitive material analysis," the engineer continued, his voice strained. "And the internal structure. It doesn't compute. It's solid, yet empty. Like space itself folded in on itself." I stepped closer, my academic detachment struggling against a burgeoning sense of disquiet. This wasn't merely ancient, it was wrong. My fingers traced a phantom ridge, a line that seemed to exist only if I didn't focus too hard, like the edge of a dream. It felt smooth, yet subtly abrasive, a texture that contradicted itself under my exploration. My historian's mind searched for parallels, for context, for any framework into which to slot this impossible thing, and found none. It didn't belong to any known civilization, any geological epoch, any natural process. It simply was. "Is what we hoped you might tell us," he glanced at me, then back at the object, a nascent fear flickering in his eyes.
We haven't moved it from this chamber in the coastal caves since bringing it ashore. The artifact sat there, a black hole in the fabric of my understanding, already beginning to unravel the meticulously constructed order of my world. I felt a strange, almost magnetic pull from its impossible geometry, a lure into its unfathomable depths. My gaze lingered on its surface, and for a fleeting, terrifying moment, I thought I saw not a solid form, but a window into something vast and indifferent, something that pulsed with an ancient, slumbering power. The magnetic pull that had stirred within me in the presence of the artifact only deepened with each passing hour, a subtle, insistent hum beneath the surface of my awareness. It wasn't merely curiosity, not the academic hunger that usually drove my research. I had moved the obsidian monolith from the secure facility to my private study, a space usually reserved for contemplation and the quiet turning of ancient texts. I spent days poring over its surface, tracing the impossible geometry with my fingertips, feeling the cool, smooth stone. My initial attempts at cataloging its material composition had yielded nothing conclusive. It defied classification, a paradox solidified. The more I studied, the more my meticulous notes became a jumble of half-formed theories and wild conjectures, each more outlandish than the last. My focus, once a sharpened blade, began to fray at the edges. It started innocently enough, a phantom whisper at the periphery of my hearing. The first time, I was hunched over the artifact, a magnifying glass pressed to its surface, examining a particularly intricate, looping indentation. A breath, like dry leaves skittering across stone, brushed against my ear. I straightened, my neck cracking, and glanced around the silent study. The windows were closed, the house empty. Just the old timbers groaning, I muttered to myself, rubbing the bridge of my nose. Fatigue, I decided. The relentless hours, the pressure of this unprecedented discovery. A few hours later, as the twilight bled purple and gray into the room, I caught a flicker of movement. A shadow, not cast by the lamp, but something faster, darker, that darted past the open doorway to the hall. My head snapped up. Nothing. The hallway was empty, the familiar patterns of light and shadow from the streetlights outside undisturbed. They never formed coherent words, just an indistinct sibilance that teased the edges of my understanding. The artifact, I reasoned, demanded more context. Its origin point, the newly discovered deep-sea ruin, was inaccessible to me directly, but the coastal caves nearby were known for their unique geological formations, some mirroring the impossible curves I saw in the stone. Perhaps, I thought, a geological survey, a comparative analysis, would ground me, pull me back from the precipice of my spiraling thoughts. It was a flimsy excuse, I knew, even as I packed my gear. The truth was, I felt an undeniable pull towards those ancient, echoing spaces. The drive to the coast was a blur of highway and overcast sky. The air grew heavy with the scent of salt and damp earth as I neared the familiar cliffs. I parked my vehicle at the designated overlook, the wind whipping at my coat, and began the descent down the winding, precarious path to the shore. The entrance to the coastal caves was a gaping maw in the rock face, carved by millennia of crashing waves and relentless erosion. The sound of the ocean, muted and resonant, echoed through the vast chambers. I switched on my powerful headlamp, its beam cutting through the gloom, illuminating ancient stalactites dripping with mineral-rich water, and walls slick with algae. They were amplified by the cavern's acoustics, a chorus of unintelligible murmurs that seemed to rise from the very stone around me. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat, listening intently. It was like a crowd speaking just beyond a thick wall, their words just out of reach, yet undeniably their dot. Hello? I called out, my voice swallowed by the cavern's maw, sounding thin and foolish. Only the rhythmic crash of distant waves and the dripping of water answered. Yet, the murmuring persisted, a low, constant thrum beneath the natural sounds. Then, a new phenomenon. As my beam passed over certain sections of the cave wall, I saw them, fleeting impressions, like faces pressed against a pane of frosted glass,
gone before my conscious mind could register a single feature. This was not fatigue. This was not stress. My historian's mind, a fortress of logic and empirical evidence, was under siege. The artifact, back in my study, felt like a silent, malevolent anchor, pulling me deeper into this unsettling reality. The answer, I feared, was far more disturbing than any ancient mystery. This was something else, a resonance that thrummed along my nerves, a low vibration just beyond the threshold of hearing, pulling me, always pulling me, back to the obsidian shard. My lab, once a sanctuary of ordered chaos, began to unravel at the edges of my vision. The spines of books on the high shelves, typically a neat grid of leather and cloth, seemed to subtly ripple, their titles momentarily blurring into indecipherable glyphs before snapping back into legible English. I'd blink, rub my eyes, and dismiss it as fatigue, the strain of late nights spent hunched over the artifact, its cold, smooth surface whispering unspoken theorems against my fingertips. Yet, the distortions grew bolder. The grain in the mahogany desk, a familiar whirl I'd traced countless times, started to twist, forming impossible geometries that defied the natural growth of wood, patterns that folded in on themselves, hinting at dimensions I couldn't grasp. I found myself sketching. Not conscious effort, but a hand moving almost autonomously, driven by an impulse I didn't recognize. On the margins of ancient maps, on the backs of discarded printouts, even on the steamed glass of my water bottle, intricate, angular symbols bloomed. They weren't hieroglyphs I knew, nor any script from humanity's long, forgotten past. These were alien, sharp-edged, yet possessed a strange, unsettling elegance, like the language of a geometry that refused to lie flat. I'd stare at them, a chill settling in my bones, realizing I had no memory of drawing them, only the finished product staring back, a testament to an intelligence acting through my own hand. "Dean? You in there?" The voice of a colleague, muffled by the heavy oak door, startled me. I dropped the stylus, which clattered against the stone artifact. "Yes," I rasped, my throat dry. "Come in." The door creaked open, revealing the department head, their brow furrowed with a concern that felt both alien and intrusive. Their gaze swept over the stacks of unfiled papers, the half-eaten, forgotten meals. Finally settled on me, my eyes ringed with purple, my hair a disheveled nest. "You haven't left the lab in days, Dean," the department head stated, their voice a careful blend of admonition and worry. "The research is important, yes. Your well-being." I waved a dismissive hand, a gesture I instantly regretted as it felt abrupt, almost hostile. "The work demands focus. We are on the precipice of something monumental." My voice, even to my own ears, sounded brittle, strained. The department head stepped closer, their eyes narrowing as they took in the sprawling, incomprehensible sketches on my desk. "What are these?" they asked, picking up a notepad adorned with the strange symbols. A tremor ran through me. "Just preliminary notes. Theoretical concepts." I snatched the pad back, a sudden surge of protectiveness washing over me. "Unfinished." A sigh escaped them, heavy and laden. "Look, Dean, a break. Even a short one. The air at the coastal caves might do you good. Clear your head." Their suggestion felt less like advice and more like a thinly veiled plea. The suggestion of the coastal caves, however, lodged itself in my mind, not as a means to clear my head, but as an echo of the artifact's own silent summons. The magnetic pull had begun to manifest as a distinct pressure behind my eyes, a constant, low throb that resonated with a distant, echoing call. It was a call I felt more than heard, a primal urge that twisted my gut, directing me away from the fluorescent hum of the lab, towards the raw, untamed edge of the land. I drove, the coastal highway unspooling beneath my tires, a ribbon of asphalt leading me into the embrace of the salt-laced wind. The pressure in my head intensified with each mile, a compass needle spun wild, yet pointing with uncanny precision. Inside, the world compressed. The roar of the ocean was muted, replaced by the rhythmic slosh and suck of water against rock, a sound that seemed to breathe with an impossible, ancient cadence. The air, thick with the scent of ozone and decay, clung to me. Here, the subtle distortions of my lab exploded into terrifying clarity. The very rocks seemed to pulse. They were etched not just on the surface, but seemed to extend into the rock, dissolving into impossible depths, their geometry bending and folding in defiance of all known physics. And there, upon the wet, reflective surface of the largest pool, a shimmering, not of light, but of pure, unadulterated pattern. It was the true face of the shifting geometries, the impossible angles, the alien symbols, all coalescing into a single, vast, living tapestry. The water was not merely reflecting, it was displaying. It was a window, not to the sky above, but to a reality beneath reality, a cosmic blueprint vibrating with silent, terrible power. The revelation struck me with the force of a physical blow. These were not mere hallucinations. The artifact was not driving me mad, it was merely opening my eyes. The world, the entire mundane facade, was a thin veil, and beneath it, something vast, indifferent, and utterly non-human had always been there, slumbering, its dreams woven into the very fabric of existence. And I, Dean, was now seeing its dreams. The magnetic pull inside me surged, not a hum, but a roar, a terrible recognition. I had found its echo, and it had found mine. You have. The department head's voice trailed, a judgment heavy in the humid air of my study. Their gaze, a dull, familiar gray, swept over the chaos I now inhabited, strata of forgotten meals hardening on chipped plates, notes spiraling into indecipherable glyphs, and the artifact itself, gleaming with an internal, impossible light, drawing all vision inward. My own eyes, I knew, were twin hollows of purple, my hair a matted nest of preoccupation. I offered no explanation, no apology. What could I say? That the world they knew was a flimsy veil? Their world was a flat, predictable map. Mine was becoming a Mobius strip, twisting and folding in on itself. I merely nodded, a gesture devoid of meaning, and watched the retreating back, a silhouette against the sunlit hallway, before turning back to the true work. The artifact pulsed, a silent, internal rhythm that aligned with the frantic thrum beneath my ribs. Sleep became a battlefield, an unavoidable surrender to the entity's burgeoning influence. My waking hours were a frayed tether, straining against the pull of a deeper reality. When I finally collapsed onto my cot, the room spun, not with fatigue, but with the dizzying echoes of angles that refused to be right. I stood on a shore, the sand beneath my bare feet a shifting mosaic of iridescent scales. The sky above was not blue, but a swirling, liquid tapestry of ochre and viridian, where stars, impossibly vast, hung like distant, knowing eyes. There was no sound, only a profound, resonant hum that vibrated through my bones, a note struck from the deepest well of time. It was the feeling of being a single dust mote on a planetary engine. I awoke with a gasp, the hum still resonating in my inner ear, the metallic tang of fear a fresh wound in my mouth. The artifact on my desk seemed to throb, its polished surface catching the pre-dawn light with a hungry sheen. The dreams intensified. Each night, a deeper plunge. I began to perceive landscapes that defied terrestrial logic. Mountains climbed not towards the sky, but into themselves, their peaks folding into their own foundations, forming impossible loops of stone. The vegetation was fungal and alien, vast forests of bioluminescent stalks that pulsed with a slow, deliberate light, illuminating paths that led to nowhere, or everywhere, simultaneously. And then came the consciousness. It was not a voice, nor a presence I could pinpoint with my senses. It was a vast, crushing understanding that permeated the dreamscape. It was the architect of these impossible spaces, the slumbering engine behind the shifting reality. I was merely a fleeting thought within its dreaming, a transient ripple on its surface. It was formless, yet I felt its colossal weight, its ancient hunger, its indifferent gaze sweeping over the endless,
non-Euclidean vistas it conjured. My own consciousness, so fragile and human, was a mere splinter against its oceanic expanse. I was a vessel, a conduit, and it was beginning to stir within me, stretching its immense, unseen limbs. I started seeing the edges of these dreams in my waking hours. The lines of my study walls would waver, hinting at curves and impossible angles. The hum persisted, a low, guttural vibration that sometimes drowned out the mundane sounds of the city. Food tasted like ash, sleep offered no rest, only a deeper immersion into the entity's dream logic. My determination, once fueled by academic curiosity, now twisted into a desperate compulsion. One morning, after a particularly vivid dream of an endless, subterranean ocean where the very water seemed to hold the gaze of something ancient, I awoke with a new, undeniable imperative. The hum wasn't just in my ears, it was a physical vibration in my chest, pulling me. It was a silent, persistent command, a compass needle spun by an unseen hand. The dreams had not just shown me things, they had imprinted a destination, a memory of a place I had never consciously known. I left my study, the half-empty coffee mug still steaming, the artifact still gleaming its impossible light. The city faded behind me, its predictable grid giving way to winding roads, then dirt tracks, until the air grew thick with salt and the roar of the ocean became a constant, rhythmic pulse. The sun was a dull ache in the sky, reflecting off the gray, churning sea. The path led me to the coastline, where the land met the crushing power of the waves in a series of jagged, ancient cliffs. And there they were, the coastal caves. Their mouths gaped like wounds in the rock, black and vast. The waves crashed against the cliff face, sending plumes of spray high into the air, yet the roar felt distant, muffled, as if I had already stepped into a different acoustic. I stood before the largest opening, a chasm that swallowed the light. The dreams had shown me this place, or a place like it. The shifting geometries, the profound, ancient hum, it all resonated with the very air in these caves. This was no mere geological formation. This was a threshold. The entity's dream logic had led me here, to a place where the veil between worlds was thin, almost transparent. The hum was deafening now, an internal roar. It gleamed, a silent, mocking eye in the humid air, impervious to their mundane disapproval. They saw disarray. I saw a nascent order, a nascent truth struggling to be born from the shattered remnants of my former world. Their words, "you have," still echoed, a pronouncement of my academic demise. But what did it matter? Determination, cold and sharp, settled in my gut. Let them judge. Let them dismiss. They were blind, and I, perhaps, was finally beginning to see. Days folded into nights, distinguished only by the quality of the light filtering through the grime-streaked window. I ceased to differentiate between waking and dreaming, the artifact the axis around which my entire existence now spun. I touched it, not with the gloved precision of a historian, but with bare, trembling fingers. Its surface, cool and smooth, pulsed with an internal geometry that defied the eye. I traced its impossible angles, its curves that seemed to fold inward upon themselves, not just in 3 dimensions, but in something more. Something other. The patterns weren't merely decorative. They were language, but not of sounds or symbols. They were a grammar of existence, a silent hum that began to resonate within my own skull. I stopped trying to rationalize it, to fit it into known archaeological frameworks. The artifact wasn't a relic from a past civilization, it was a key to a different kind of perception, an aperture to a reality that had always been present, just veiled. My first conscious realization of this came subtly. I was staring at the wall, a familiar patch of peeling paint, when the lines of its cracks seemed to waver, to breathe. The wall itself, for a fleeting instant, lost its solidity, revealing a faint, shimmering lattice beneath. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, leaving me blinking, my breath catching. Was it fatigue? A trick of the light?
Then, the floorboards of my study began to ripple, not physically, but visually. The grain of the wood would momentarily deepen, then flatten, as if a silent current passed beneath its surface. The air itself seemed to thicken, to hum with an unheard frequency. These were not hallucinations, I knew. This was the world shedding its skin, revealing the musculature beneath. The artifact, resting on its velvet cushion, seemed to thrum in response to my heightened perception. It was guiding me, teaching me to perceive the tremors in the fabric of the mundane. I felt an irresistible pull, a need to move, to find a place where this veil was thinner, where the underlying architecture might be more overtly revealed. My gaze fell upon a crumpled map of the local coastline, an old tourist pamphlet I'd once used as a bookmark. My finger hovered over a familiar stretch of jagged shore, marked with the faint, blue symbols of coastal caves. The journey was a blur of motion, the world outside my car window a smear of greens and grays. Even the road signs seemed to shimmer, their letters subtly rearranging themselves before settling back into legibility. I drove until the asphalt ended, until the air grew thick with salt and the roar of the ocean. I ventured deeper, the small flashlight beam a futile spear against the encroaching vastness. I saw lines, faint and impossible, etched into the very rock, patterns that mirrored those on the artifact. They weren't natural striations, they were too precise, too deliberate. The cavern's ceiling, a dome of rough-hewn stone, began to undulate. Not the rock itself, but the space within it. It stretched, then compressed, as if the very dimensions were elastic. I held the artifact aloft, its polished surface catching the weak beam of my light, reflecting the warped reality around me. It vibrated in my hand, a living thing, resonating with the unseen forces at play. And then, I saw it. Not with my eyes, not truly, but with a deeper sense that had awakened within me. The air in the cave was not empty. It was filled with invisible strands, a colossal, intricate web of energy and form, woven through every atom, every molecule. The rock, the water, the very air, they were all threads in this immense tapestry. And at the intersections of these threads, I perceived flickers, momentary glimpses of something vast, something impossibly ancient, slumbering just beyond the immediate veil. It was a structure, a design, not random, but purposeful, immense beyond human comprehension. The artifact was not merely a key, it was a lens, focusing my awareness onto this underlying scaffold of existence. I wasn't just seeing distortions, I was seeing the raw, unvarnished framework of reality itself, a framework that hummed with a silent, indifferent power. It was like looking at the skeleton beneath the flesh of the world. And that skeleton, I now understood, was not natural. It had an architect. An unseen one, whose dreaming thoughts were the very substance of my world. My descent had become an ascent, into a horror far grander than any I could have imagined. Its silent verdict had been clear, I was adrift, a derelict vessel. But their judgment, I now understood, was merely the static of a dying frequency. They saw only the surface, the mundane wreckage of a mind unmoored, while I was charting new abysses. I felt a strange lightness, a severing. No more feigned normalcy, no more desperate attempts to tether myself to their flimsy reality. The artifact, perched on its makeshift stand of stacked, forgotten texts, seemed to hum with a low, resonant thrum, a silent invitation. Its non-Euclidean angles, once merely baffling, now pulsed with a logic I felt in my bones, a geometry that spoke of deeper symmetries. I turned from the door, my back to the world I had known, and faced the true horizon. The air in my study thickened, not with dust, but with an unseen viscosity. The familiar lines of the bookshelves, the worn edges of the desk, began to waver, softening at their boundaries. I blinked, rubbing at eyes that felt gritty with perpetual wakefulness, but the distortion persisted. A fleeting shimmer, like heat rising from asphalt, rippled across the wall, revealing for a fraction of a second, an underlying tapestry of impossible hues and angles. They were not colors of the spectrum I knew, but vast, silent chords struck in an unknown dimension, resonating with a profound, terrifying indifference.
Sleep became a mockery, a brief descent into deeper, more vivid awakenings.
They were the slumbering entity I knew, felt, understood. My dreams were not dreams, but unfiltered transmissions, glimpses into the true machinery of the cosmos. My phone, a persistent drone of forgotten connections, vibrated with increasing urgency, a choir of worried colleagues and a distant, bewildered sister. The internet, too, became an unnecessary distraction, its endless stream of human banality a grating white noise against the symphony of my burgeoning perception.
My isolation wasn't a retreat, it was an embrace.
I was shedding the skin of the mundane, preparing for a deeper immersion.
It wasn't sound, but a vibration that rearranged the very air around it.
One evening, as the last vestiges of twilight bled from the sky, the object pulsed with a sudden, violent surge. It was a pull, an undeniable summons, not to a place, but to a state. And I knew, with a certainty that transcended logic, where I needed to go.
The coastal caves.
I packed only the essentials, the artifact, carefully wrapped in thick cloth, my most precious, incomprehensible notes, and a few provisions. The drive was a blur, the familiar world outside the car windows a sickly, artificial overlay. The trees seemed to writhe with hidden geometries, the road signs flickered with alien glyphs, and the distant city lights pulsed with a rhythm that was not human. The air grew sharp with salt and brine as I approached the shore. I found the entrance to the coastal caves just as the moon, a sliver of bone, began its slow climb above the churning waves. Inside, the sound of the surf was magnified, a visceral roar that vibrated through the very rock. I set up my meager camp deep within the caves, far from the reach of the highest tides. The air here was heavy, pregnant with the scent of damp earth and something else, something primal and electric. Here, in the womb of the earth, the veil thinned further. The cave walls, rough and pitted, began to breathe. I wasn't seeing creatures, I was seeing the architecture of existence, the living framework beneath the world. The entity was not merely slumbering, it was the very ground I stood upon, the air I breathed, the water that carved the rock. The artifact was not merely a key, it was a lens, focusing the truth of my own transformation. I was not just observing, I was becoming. I pressed my palm against the cool, damp rock of the cave wall, and for a moment, I felt the slow, deliberate pulse of something truly ancient, truly colossal, echoing back.
There was no going back.
There was only deeper. His silence had been a pronouncement, a severance. But his leaving hadn't cleared the air, it had merely thinned the veil, exposing the true, shimmering pressure building within the room.
The artifact, even cloaked, pulsed.
Not with light or heat, but with an insistent, silent weight that pressed against my skull, carving pathways through my thoughts. It was a compass to a world beyond the visible, and its needle now trembled, pulling me towards the coast. I hadn't consciously decided to go, the decision had simply coalesced, an inevitable truth forming from the chaotic swirl of my fractured mind.
The compulsion was absolute. My hands, trembling, found the worn leather satchel. The artifact, surprisingly light despite its perceived density, settled within, an unsettling warmth radiating through the canvas.
I stepped out into the biting coastal air, the world a cacophony of distorted shapes and shimmering light.
The familiar houses of the town seemed to ripple, their corners shifting, their rooftops breathing. The sky itself felt thinner, a stretched membrane. The path to the coastal caves was a descent, a winding track carved into the sheer rock face. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of brine and something else, something ancient, mineral, and utterly indifferent. Each step was a battle against the earth itself, the ground seeming to tilt, to resist my passage. My breath hitched in my throat, each inhalation a ragged gasp. The sheer effort was monumental, yet the pull from the satchel grew stronger, an invisible tether drawing me deeper into the primordial maw of the earth.
Finally, the entrance to the coastal caves loomed, a jagged tear in the cliff face. Water dripped from the cavern's ceiling, echoing in the vast, echoing space. I removed the artifact, cradling it in my hands. The moment it was exposed, the caves seemed to respond. The rhythmic crash of the ocean outside softened, becoming a distant, pulsing thrum. The very stones around me began to hum, a deep, resonant chord that vibrated through my bones. The artifact itself began to shift, its impossible angles deepening, becoming less a static object and more a living, breathing concept. Then the visions began. Not dreams, not memories, but pure, unfiltered data flooding my mind. But these weren't mere carvings. As I stared, they shimmered, then bled into other images. I saw the towering ziggurats of Mesopotamia, not as monuments to gods, but as conduits, their stepped forms replicating the artifact's structure. I saw the megaliths of ancient Britain, their silent stones not aligned with stars, but with invisible currents of something that emanated from the sleeping depths. The realization struck me with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. It wasn't just my history that was a lie, it was all history. Every civilization, every myth, every grand design was merely an echo, a distorted reflection of this slumbering presence. The entity hadn't just influenced humanity, it had orchestrated it. It wasn't pain in the conventional sense, but a profound, fundamental rewiring. I was no longer an observer, no longer merely studying the artifact. I was becoming an extension of it, a vessel for its awakening. The entity was not merely stirring, it was reaching, unfolding, and I was its first, agonizing point of contact. The coastal caves, once a refuge, now felt like the birthing chamber of a new, horrifying awareness, and I, unwilling and yet utterly enthralled, was being remade. My breath hitched, a strangled sob escaping my lips, as the boundaries of myself dissolved into the vast, indifferent consciousness that pulsed beneath the world. It had judged the artifact, most keenly. The true pull was elsewhere, a deep, resonant hum that had begun in the artifact's silent geometry and now echoed from the very marrow of the earth. I walked, driven by an imperative that bypassed thought, my feet. Finding purchase on the slick, dark stones of the path leading down to the coast. The air, thick with salt and the metallic tang of distant storms, filled my lungs not as oxygen, but as a subtle, pervasive current, guiding me. The sky, a bruised purple at the horizon, seemed to sag, heavy with unspoken things. Inside, the world wore its skin thinly. The air was heavy, damp, tasting of mineral and decay, yet it also carried a faint, almost imperceptible warmth, like a breath held for eons. It was not mere stone. The rock felt like hardened tissue, a colossal, ancient dermis. Each crevice, each crystal and glint, was a scar, a pore, a dormant follicle in the vast, slumbering height of something immense. The water that dripped from the ceiling, gathering in shallow pools on the uneven floor, was not simply groundwater, it was the slow, viscous seep of an internal fluid, a deep circulation within this colossal, living form. My breath hitched. I knelt, pressing my palm against the damp earth, feeling not inert matter, but the vast, slow pulse of something ancient, something that breathed in geological time. It was the flesh of the world, and I was within its folds, its chambers. My own body began to blur, its boundaries dissolving into the immediate environment. My skin felt porous, absorbing the dampness, the mineral tang. My bones felt like porous coral, a lattice resonating with the cave's deep hum. My blood, usually a contained current, now seemed to flow in concert with the seeping water, a part of the greater, slow circulation. My breath was no longer my own, it was the cave's exhalation, deep and heavy, carrying the scent of primordial slumber. I was not merely in the cave, I was of it. My individual form, my sense of Dean, began to unravel, thread by thread, into the vast, indifferent tapestry of this living, breathing earth. A horrifying communion began, not with words or rituals, but with a desperate, internal surrender. I offered my mind, a fragile cup, to the overwhelming presence, seeking to taste its essence, to understand its dreaming. I pushed past the fear, past the instinct to recoil from the dissolution of self. I yearned to touch the true reality, to become a conduit for its slow, vast awakening. A pressure built behind my eyes, a silent roar in my skull. Images, not seen but felt, surged through me, the slow grind of tectonic plates as a shift in posture, the volcanic eruptions as a deep, guttural sigh, the erosion of mountains as the shedding of old skin. I perceived the indifferent vastness of its dreaming, a slumber so profound it encompassed galaxies, yet was contained within the very stone I touched. There was no malice, no benevolence, only an infinite, unthinking presence. My heart, or what felt like it, began to beat in unison with this cosmic pulse, a slow, heavy thrum that resonated through every atom of my dissolving being. I felt myself stretching, expanding, becoming attenuated, yet simultaneously more dense, more real. The air in my lungs was the deep breath of the world, the grit on my tongue, the very dust of its dreaming. I was a single nerve ending, a tiny sensor in an immeasurable body, finally attuned to its true, horrifying scale. The communion was not gentle. I opened my eyes, but the world was no longer simply seen. There was a deeper call, an insistent hum beneath the clatter of the mundane world, a resonant thrumming that had become the only truth I recognized. The artifact, nestled in the canvas bag slung over my shoulder, vibrated with a low, almost imperceptible frequency, a silent siren song. It was not merely an object, it was a compass pointing to an unseen north, a key to a lock I was now determined to open. My steps were purposeful, each stride carrying me further from the world of deadlines and dusty archives, deeper into the realm of the undeniable. The air grew sharp with salt and brine as I neared the coast, the roar of the ocean a growing crescendo, a symphony of primordial power. The path to the coastal caves was treacherous, a scramble over barnacle-encrusted rocks and slick seaweed. The wind whipped at my coat, a cold, probing hand, but I felt no chill, only a feverish anticipation. The cave mouth yawned, a jagged maw in the cliff face, exhaling an earthy, mineral scent that mingled with the briny tang of the sea. Within, the world shifted. My footsteps echoed, swallowed almost instantly by the vastness. I pressed deeper, the artifact in my hand now a pulsating warmth, guiding me through winding passages. Bioluminescent algae clung to the walls in patches, casting an ethereal, sickly green glow that made the cavern appear to pulse with a slow, deliberate heartbeat. I found the chamber. It was not marked, not special in any obvious way, yet I knew it. The space was a vast, echoing dome, carved by eons of tidal currents and geological pressure. In its center, a shallow pool of water reflected the faint light, its surface utterly still, an obsidian mirror. This was it. My breath hitched, a ragged gasp in the cavern's heavy air. I knelt at the edge of the pool, the non-Euclidean geometry of the artifact cool and solid in my palm. Its surface, a labyrinth of impossible angles, seemed to drink the meager light, absorbing it into its depths. But the determination, a burning ember in my chest, pushed me forward. There was no turning back, only the relentless pursuit of what lay beyond. With a trembling hand, I lowered the artifact into the still water. The moment it touched the surface, the world screamed. The water in the pool did not ripple, it fractured, its surface breaking into 1,000 impossible angles, each reflecting a different, terrifying reality. Not carvings, not formations, but thoughts made manifest in the stone itself, shifting, twisting, impossible to comprehend yet utterly undeniable. It was not a break into madness, but an expansion so profound, so violent, that my human perception shattered. The walls of the cave, the water, my own hands, they were no longer solid objects but shimmering veils, thin membranes stretched over an infinitely deeper, more complex reality. I saw it then, the reveal, the entity was not merely in the artifact, nor was it merely slumbering beneath the world. It was the world. The mountains, the oceans, the very air I breathed,
were but solidified expressions of its dreaming consciousness. Our reality, the one I had known, was a fleeting, fragile ripple on the surface of its vast, indifferent slumber. Not a chosen one, but a point of resonance, a frequency matching its own. Pain, exquisite and unbearable, lanced through every neuron, every fiber of my being. It was the pain of a mind expanding beyond its design, of a soul being flayed open to witness truths no human was meant to bear. My eyes, I knew, were wide, unblinking, reflecting not the cavern's dim light but the swirling, impossible geometries that now permeated everything. The water in the pool pulsed, not with light, but with presence. I saw the veins of the earth, the slow, tectonic shifts, the deep currents of magma, all as part of a single, colossal organism, breathing, dreaming. And within that dream, tiny, ephemeral sparks, humanity, civilization, our entire history, were less than dust motes, utterly insignificant, unaware of the colossal, dreaming indifference that held them. My body convulsed, my muscles locking, then spasming. I was no longer Dean, the historian. I was a receiver, an antenna, a vessel. The entity's consciousness, once a distant hum, now surged through me, a torrent of pure, unadulterated being. It was not malevolent, not benevolent, simply is. And its awakening, channeled through me, was not a grand cataclysm, but a subtle, terrifying transformation of the world, visible only through my shattered, expanded perception. The air in the cave solidified into crystalline thought. The sound of the ocean outside became a rhythmic chant of creation and decay. The very concept of time unwound into a spiraling helix of simultaneous moments. I saw the true forms of things, the underlying patterns, the non-Euclidean architecture of a reality too vast, too ancient for human comprehension. My mind screamed, not in fear, but in the agony of absolute understanding, the unbearable cost of seeing the universe as it truly was, alive, horrifyingly indifferent, and now, subtly, terrifyingly awake. And I, Dean, was its first, unwilling eye. But that judgment, that human concern, was a flimsy veil. My world had fractured, splintered not into pieces, but into an infinite, terrible clarity. I stood amidst the cold, damp breath of the coastal caves, the air thick with the salt-laced sigh of the ocean. My body, once a vessel of dull ache and weary bone, felt different. Not weightless, but detached, a shell through which the world now poured unfiltered. My skin no longer prickled, it merely existed, a porous membrane allowing the true light to penetrate. They were solidified thought, petrified intent. Each stalactite, each glistening wall, vibrated with a silent hum, a low, resonant thrumming that was the very pulse of the deep. It was a fluid consciousness, ceaselessly swirling, tracing patterns of ancient knowing that spoke of geometries never conceived by the waking mind. I saw the currents not as movement, but as the slow, deliberate tendrils of a vast, slumbering thing, stirring. The light that filtered in through the jagged mouth of the cave was a lie. Beyond its mundane glow, I perceived the true illumination, a shifting spectrum of colors that had no names, shimmering from the very fabric of existence. It was a light that twisted and pulsed, revealing the myriad, unseen connections binding everything. The air itself was a tapestry of shimmering, almost crystalline strands, each one a thread in a colossal, intricate web. My thoughts were no longer my own, not entirely. They were echoes within a greater consciousness, a single node in a network of profound, terrifying sentience. The questions that once plagued me, the nature of the artifact, the meaning of the dreams, had dissolved into a single, comprehensive answer. My perception, once a filter, was now an aperture, gaping wide to the true face of the world. And it was glorious in its horrific indifference, beautiful in its grotesque truth. A distant call, fragmented by the wind, pierced the rhythmic thrum of the caves. "Dean! Are you in here?" The sound was a dull vibration against the greater harmony, a tiny, struggling insect caught in the vast, silent song. A figure emerged from the dappled light of the cave entrance, silhouetted momentarily.
It was a local fisherman, known to me from fleeting exchanges, his face now a mask of anxious concern. But I saw past the concern, past the weathered skin and the wool cap. Beneath the surface of his mundane form, I saw the intricate, shifting patterns of his true self. His bones were not solid calcium but shimmering, pulsating lattices of unknown material, constantly rearranging themselves. His flesh was a transient, fluid membrane, barely containing the swirling vortex of raw, unformed thought and emotion that was his actual core. He was a temporary construct, a fleeting manifestation of something deeper and far more complex, a surface ripple on an ocean of primordial being.
Dean! What are you doing down here? You haven't been seen for days. The department head sent me. His voice was a flat, uninspired drone, a series of predictable vibrations in the air. I did not respond with words. What words could convey the geometry of his true form, the terrifying beauty of his underlying structure? What language could articulate the profound indifference of the universe now revealed to me? I simply gazed at him, my own eyes, I imagined, reflecting the shimmering, terrifying light that was now my sole reality. I felt no fear, no empathy, no human connection. Only a vast, patient understanding. He took a hesitant step back, his temporary form bristling with a primitive, animalistic fear. Dean? Are you all right?
You look. He trailed off, unable to articulate the dissonance he perceived.
He saw a man, I saw a fractal expression of a greater truth. My mouth, an instrument of former utility, opened slightly. I felt the movement, but it was not I who commanded it. It was the vastness, the awakening, seeking to express itself through my limited, human mechanisms. A sound emerged, not a word, but a resonant hum, deep and ancient, a vibration that seemed to ripple through the very stone of the cave. It was the sound of the deep. The sound of everything. He turned and fled, his mundane form scrambling towards the distant, comforting lie of the surface world. He had glimpsed a sliver of the new sight, and it had shattered his fragile reality. I watched him go, not with regret, but with a quiet, profound comprehension. He was merely a ripple. And I was no longer a ripple. I was a part of the current, a conscious node, a conduit. The mundane world was a fading dream. The true reality, vast, indifferent, and exquisitely horrifying, was finally awake. And so, irrevocably, was I. Silent, a colleague from the initial expedition, stepped into the humid breath of the coastal caves, a lamp held aloft, casting a trembling orb against the ancient rock. But I saw him not as flesh and bone, but as a fleeting pattern of light and shadow, a temporary ripple in the vast, underlying fabric. It was not a sound for ears, but for the very core of being. My human form, a vessel now too small, too fragile, began to hum with an energy that was not my own. Each nerve ending became a conduit, each thought a whisper from the deep. I felt the intricate dance of atoms, the slow grind of tectonic plates, the distant hum of stars. The colleague called my name, his voice a forgotten echo from a dream. I offered no reply, for the tongue that would have spoken was already dissolving into the greater syntax. The caves themselves were no longer stone and water, but the entity's nascent breath, exhaling me into a reality that dwarfed all previous understanding. My eyes, or what remained of them, saw not the worried face of the colleague, but the shimmering, infinitesimal threads that bound him to the same cosmic loom that now wove me. Years later, the concept of years itself a quaint, human construct, I perceived. My consciousness, once confined to the narrow corridors of a brain, now drifted like a vast, unseen current through the forgotten spaces of the world. I was the whisper in the static, the shiver on the periphery of vision, the subtle wrongness in the geometry of a shadow. I was everywhere and nowhere, a diffuse awareness, a persistent resonance. I observed the archivist.
They sat hunched over a dusty desk in a forgotten corner of an old research facility, surrounded by towering stacks of neglected files and forgotten reports. The air, thick with the scent of aged paper and settled dust, was a tapestry of particles, each a tiny node in the expanding network I now inhabited. The archivist, a diligent seeker of lost knowledge, meticulously sifted through boxes labeled with dates long past, their movements precise, almost ritualistic. Their fingers, stained with ink and the grit of time, traced the edges of brittle pages, their brow furrowed in concentration. Then, a box. My box. I watched as their hands, guided by an unseen current, pulled forth a collection of my old journals, my scribbled notes, my frantic diagrams. These were the vestiges of my former self, the desperate attempts of a human mind to grapple with the unfathomable. They opened the first journal, the brittle cover creaking like an old bone. I cannot reconcile what I see with what I know. The artifact. It's a key, not to another world, but to the true one, hidden beneath the thin veneer of our consensus reality. The angles are wrong, the space is impossible. The entity, my entity, stirred within the depths of my expanded being, a slow, inexorable unfolding. The dreams. They are not dreams. They are transmissions, data streams from a place beyond human comprehension. And the entity. It is waking. Its influence spreads like a silent contagion, a subtle shift in perception, a whisper in the subconscious. The archivist turned a page, their fingers trembling slightly. I observed the intricate dance of their neural pathways, the sudden surge of adrenaline, the quickening pulse. They were beginning to see the patterns, to hear the distant hum, just as I once had. The coastal caves. They are not merely geological formations. They are the entity's initial exhalation, a breathing chamber for its slow awakening. I am drawn there, compelled by a force beyond my will, yet strangely, I feel no resistance. It is destiny, a horrifying, beautiful communion. The world will change. It is already changing. Look closer. Do you not see the cracks in the sky? The geometry in the mundane? The archivist closed the journal, their gaze unfocused, drifting towards the dusty window. Outside, the city hummed with its usual rhythm, a symphony of unawareness. But I, through the archivist's nascent perception, saw the subtle distortions, the way the light bent just so around a distant skyscraper. Creating an angle that defied logic, the fleeting, impossible shadow cast by a passing cloud, the almost imperceptible tremor in the air. A vibration that hummed just beneath the threshold of hearing. A subtle shift in the light, a flicker of something vast and ancient at the very edge of the archivist's vision. They blinked, rubbing their eyes, dismissing it as fatigue, but I knew. The entity's influence had found a new vessel, a new set of eyes to peer through. The world was slowly, irrevocably, becoming what it was always meant to be. And I, the conduit, was merely observing the inevitable. The song continued, silent and eternal, and now, another ear had begun to perceive its first, faint notes.